Can you discuss what overbreathing is and why people might become overbreathers?
Absolutely. So overbreathing is a kind of breathing behavior or breathing dysregulation that is actually much more common than we might think. Overbreathing involves breathing out too much carbon dioxide, which ends up in actually reducing the amount of oxygen that is available to our brains, to our muscles, to the rest of our bodies. It is a bit counterintuitive that we need to conserve so much of our carbon dioxide. Most of the time when people think about breathing, they think about the importance of oxygen. Mm-hmm. And oxygen is, of course, important. We do need to get enough of it. Sure. Right? It's pretty important for daily functioning. But what most people don't realize is that we don't really need to make an effort to get enough oxygen. For those of us that live at sea level, if we have mostly healthy hearts, healthy lungs, then the oxygen that we take in from the air, or rather the air that we take in through the process of breathing, contains about 21% oxygen, and then the air we breathe out contains about 15% oxygen. So we're using only a quarter of the oxygen that we take in. Mm-hmm. We have plenty of it, right? We don't need to make an effort. We don't need to take, very big breaths. We don't need to do anything in particular to get enough oxygen. Now, in order for that oxygen to get delivered to where it needs to go, in order for it to get released from the bloodstream, we need to have sufficient carbon dioxide. And this is the part that seems so counterintuitive, where traditionally, we think that carbon dioxide is something we need to get rid of, when in fact, Absolutely. We need to retain about 85% of it, because carbon dioxide is crucial for pH balance and therefore distribution of oxygen. If our pH balance is off, then the oxygen that is circulating in the bloodstream does not get released, and then our brains, our muscles, other organs in our body can get deprived of oxygen, and then the symptoms of that, the experience of overbreathing includes things like shortness of breath and rapid heartbeat, feeling lightheaded, having foggy mind, and having a lot of trouble thinking and focusing and figuring out what to do. You might have tingliness in your hands and feet. You might experience some gastrointestinal distress. A lot of the symptoms that people also associate with anxiety, right? So overbreathing and anxiety actually the experience is very, very similar. Mm-hmm. And many people overbreathe without realizing they're overbreathing and to think that they are experiencing anxiety.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And you mentioned mouth breathing as well, which is something that I see, mm-hmm. More commonly than I would think in practice as well, of whether it's low-grade sinus congestion or mm-hmm. various things that are causing people to become mouth breathers. But is that also something that could lead them to be an overbreather if they tend to breathe more in and out through their mouth?
Yes, but particularly through an open mouth. If people are breathing out through pursed lips, that is usually okay. But breathing out through an open mouth, like if you're feeling really congested, that's very likely to lead to overbreathing. Some other ways that people might become overbreathers is if they have experience with anxiety or panic attacks or asthma attacks where they've been worried about getting enough oxygen, right? So they're trying to take these really big breaths. Which of course they don't really need, as I just mentioned, but because they're taking in so much air in, they breathe out a lot of air as well, and in the process breathe out too much carbon dioxide, interfering with the ability to distribute the oxygen that they do have. That's another very common way for people to become overbreathers. People who experience a lot of stress. Oftentimes, the body just becomes accustomed to functioning in this fight or flight mode, right? And when your body is preparing for running and fighting, it's going to try to take in more oxygen, because if you are actually mm-hmm. increasing your physical activity, right? If you're running and fighting, exactly, you would need the extra oxygen, right? But if you're just sitting in your office worrying about some big event coming up and you're not actually increasing your activity, then that increased breathing, the increased volume of air that you are taking in, again, will result in the overbreathing because you end up breathing out too much carbon dioxide. So there are various ways that people can become overbreathers, and these are some of the most common.
Yeah, it's a really interesting chapter when you dive into the physiology of breathing and these areas that we sort of take for granted and don't value quite enough. And of course, the breath being such a, as you mentioned there, such a powerful trigger for the nervous system. Mm-hmm. And HRV is a tool that's used, obviously a powerful tool in biofeedback. Last season, I had a few experts like Dr. Daniel Plews and Dr. Andrew Flatt on the podcast talking HRV and applications in endurance and team sports. But I'm interested here to dive a little deeper into the use of HRV and biofeedback. And you talk in the chapter there on it about the resonance frequency breathing rate. Can you outline what that is and some of the research on its effects on things like HRV and mood?
Absolutely. Heart rate variability is a really useful tool for a number of things, starting from psychophysiological monitoring, like the experts that you've had on your podcast in the past, using heart rate variability to monitor the athlete's ability to train, recover, etc. We can also use heart rate variability to improve our self-regulation, and that affects people who might be struggling with psychophysiological disorders such as anxiety and chronic pain and high blood pressure, but also can improve performance, whether it be athletic performance or performance in any kind of professional field, because we're training our body to produce optimal activation for whatever challenge might be coming in front of us. We're training our body to activate to just the right level to give us optimal ability to perform and then be able to recover fully once the challenge is over. In order to train and increase our heart rate variability, we can use resonance frequency breathing. Resonance frequency breathing is an optimal breathing rate that produces the highest possible heart rate variability. Typically, as we breathe in, that activates the sympathetic nervous system, and our heart rate increases. And as we breathe out, that activates the parasympathetic nervous system, and our heart rate decreases. So when we are in a state of this optimal training mode, in a state of resonance frequency, the heart rate and the breath go in sync. This is something called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And arrhythmia sounds like a bad word, but in this case, it is actually a very good thing. It is the synchrony. Yeah. I always need to clarify that because good. People get a little bit worried about right? Arrhythmia. Exactly. Yeah. What respiratory sinus arrhythmia means in this case is the synchrony between the heart rate and the breath. And when the heart rate and the breath are synchronized in this optimal way, our heart rate oscillations are maximized, meaning that our heart rate variability is maximized. And then we're able to train our autonomic nervous system to improve its ability to regulate itself. Now, for most people, that resonance frequency breathing rate is somewhere between 4.5 and 7 breaths per minute. We can determine where exactly someone's resonance frequency breathing rate is by having them breathe for a couple of minutes at each one of those breathing rates, starting at 7 breaths per minute, then going down to 6.5, 6, 5.5, 5, and 4.5 breaths per minute, and measure their heart rate variability at each one of those breathing rates, and then see which one produces maximal heart rate variability. Once we determine their resonance frequency breathing rate, we can train that person to breathe at that rate as they're training breathing. Right? So this is a really important point. We're not expecting people to breathe at this very slow breathing rate all the time. Mm-hmm. That's not possible and not necessary. You can think of it as a workout for your autonomic nervous system. So the same way that you might go to the gym and do strength training, say 3 or 4 times a week, you don't need to keep your dumbbells or kettlebells on you at all times in order to maintain the progress you've made, right? As long as you keep coming back to the gym and doing your workout, you will continue making progress and maintain the gains you've made. The same thing happens with heart rate variability training. When you do your 20-minute a day resonance frequency breathing rate practice, your heart rate variability increases, your ability to self-regulate increases, and then that ability stays with you, and you continue improving for as long as you continue the regular practice.
Yeah, such a great tool to be able to provide that feedback and be able to find that resonance frequency breathing rate. Because again, as you mentioned before, whether people may not gravitate to meditation or mindfulness, and to be able to see that real time. And